Hi everyone, I'm Callie Kim. Welcome to my garden. The weather is warming up and that means just one thing. It's tomato time, one of the most exciting times of the year. There's nothing more delicious than the taste of a vine-ripened, homegrown tomato. On the other hand, there's nothing worse than growing your tomatoes all season and not getting a harvest. Here's some tomato growing mistakes that will sabotage your harvest. First mistake, planting without knowing the tomato types can lead to crowded plants and less fruit. Now there's two different tomato types. The indeterminate plants, which these are here, which can grow 8 to 10 feet tall. They're very large plants. They grow and keep producing all season long until frost. The second type are determinate. Much smaller plants, very well suited to container growing. And what they do is they produce most of their fruit all at once, then the plant stops growing and the plant dies. And if you don't know your tomato types, you're going to mismanage your space, not provide enough room for the indeterminates, or provide way too much room for the determinate types, which can really sabotage your harvest. So the indeterminate types, if you're growing in a container, you want at least a 10 to 20 gallon container, one plant per container. If you cram too many plants in there, you're just not going to get as much fruit production. If you're growing in raised beds, you want to space them about 2 to 3 feet apart. So when you plant them too close together, they're going to get crowded, compete for nutrients, and just not produce as well for you. Now the determinate types are one of my favorites. They're very well suited to small containers like this 5 gallon. This one is one of my favorites, Tiny Tim. It only grows about 2 to 3 feet tall. Super productive. One plant per small container is really what you want to go for. If you plant your determinate types in a large container, it's just not as efficient space management. And the cool thing about determinate tomatoes is you can usually get about 2 to 3 plantings per summer. Plant them in waves about a month to 6 weeks apart. That way you can extend your harvest all summer long and even into the fall months. One mistake I've made many times with my tomato plants, and maybe you've made it too, is not planting my little seedlings deeply enough. And the reason why this is a problem is because tomatoes have little hairs on their stems. And when they're planted too shallow, you don't cover the little hairs, which actually turn into roots. And tomatoes are thirsty plants and hungry plants. And when they don't have an extensive root system, they're not able to take up the nutrients, take up the water, which means it can really sabotage your harvest. But this is an easy fix. When we planted this Golden Jubilee plant here, what I did is I planted it as deeply as I could into this 10-gallon container. You can actually plant it up to the very top set of leaves, kind of trim off the bottom set of leaves, and this way all these little teeny tiny hairs, when they touch the soil, they'll turn into roots. And you can just imagine a lateral root system spreading out from this whole entire tomato stem. It's going to make it a nice, strong, sturdy plant that's not going to blow over in those crazy wind and rainstorms you might get this summer. And those roots will help it produce a whole lot more fruit. It's actually already starting to produce flowers and a little tomato here. So I'm definitely going to get a lot of production out of this one. Please click on the thumbs up button on this video and subscribe. Next mistake is incorrect pruning. Now when you prune your tomato plants incorrectly, or worse yet, you don't prune them at all, it can lead to overcrowding, less airflow, and susceptibility to diseases, which is really going to dramatically affect your tomato harvest. Now this is when knowing your tomato types is very important. The indeterminate plants are pruned completely differently than the smaller determinate plants. And let me show you what I mean. For the indeterminate plants, you want to focus on pruning the bottom 6 inches of branches from the plant and the suckers. When you remove the branches from the bottom 6 inches of the plant, you're creating airflow under the plant. Now tomatoes are very susceptible to disease, and they need good airflow to help prevent disease, which in turn is going to lead to more harvests. You also want to focus, especially on container plants, of removing the suckers from the plant. Now the suckers are those small little shoots that come out from the armpit of the tomato stems. Remove them when they're young, especially in containers, to manage the size, and that way they don't become long, unruly, unproductive branches, and a lot more of the energy goes into producing fruit on the main stem of the plant. Your determinate plants, on the other hand, don't need as extensive pruning as your indeterminate plants. They're much smaller tomatoes, so they don't need their size managed near as much. They're going to fit well in a 5-gallon container, even if you don't prune them. However, you do still need to prune the branches that touch the soil again to help prevent soil splashing, to help control the disease of the plant, and also any yellowing or diseased leaves or branches, you do immediately want it to prune off so the disease does not spread to the remainder of the plant, and that applies to both determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. Next mistake, and I really try and stay on top of this one in the summertime, is incorrect watering. Now, overwatering can be just as bad as underwatering. When you overwater, your plant's roots can rot or the fruit can split, and it really affects your harvest. On the other hand, underwatering will cause the plants to stress out, especially in the heat, and you're just not going to get as many tomatoes. But inconsistent watering is also damaging to your tomato plants. It can cause blossom end rot and will also stress the plants out. They'll go from lots of water to a little bit of water, and they're just not going to produce as much fruit this way. So the best way that I like to stay consistent with watering, you guys know what I'm going to say, right? That's right, drip irrigation. If you can at all install drip irrigation in your raised beds or your containers, it really is the key to consistent watering. Not only will you can put it on a timer and then not have to worry about turning the water off and turning it on again, but the plants get the water right to the roots where they need it the most. And when your tomato plants have nice, strong, healthy roots, they're going to be very, very productive plants. They'll get the consistent water that they need to grow nice and strong and healthy. Now, if you can't set up drip irrigation for some reason, maybe you don't have access to a hose bib, just make sure that you water your tomato plants very, very deeply. And what you can do to make sure that the water gets to the roots is you can make like a little trough around your tomato plants. Just make a little circle in the dirt, little indentation right around the stem. Then water your plants either with your hose or with your watering can, and then let it sink in. The trough will give the water a place to sink in right around the stem. And then water again. So you want to water deeply so your roots get the nice deep hydration that they need. Not only are tomatoes very thirsty plants, but they're also very hungry plants. They're what's called heavy feeders. And what I found is that when I'm not feeding my plants consistently, that it really does drastically affect the amount of harvest I'm getting. What I do is feed my plants consistently throughout the growing season, starting with when they're very small, like this little golden nugget tomato plant here. What I do when I first plant them is I give them a really good high nitrogen fertilizer, because you want them to have a nice burst of green leafy growth. And this has a 5% nitrogen, and the nitrogen is what really helps them take off and get all the beautiful foliage. And I also add to that some of the Vermistera Vitality or the Vermistera Worm Tea, because you want your plants to be healthy. Especially tomato plants are very susceptible to disease. And the worm tea really does the trick with putting all those beneficial bacteria and microbes into the soil, which help your tomato plants be healthier. So you always want to drench it down with this little plant cocktail at the very beginning of the season, right after you plant them. Again, watering them nice and deeply so they get off to a great start from the get-go, which really gives them a huge advantage when it comes to harvesting later on. About 4 to 6 weeks after planting your tomatoes, you need to feed them again to really keep things rolling along. But you want to back off on the nitrogen at this point, because my plants are starting to flower and fruit, and I don't want to produce a lot of leaves. I want to start encouraging the flowers and fruiting. So what I do at this point is give them a little boost with a handful of compost. One of the best gentle fertilizers you can possibly do, and it's free when you make it yourself. It's going to sprinkle a little bit around the base of my plant. And I'm also going to work in a handful of the Vermistera earthworm castings. Again, providing slow and steady growth. It's a time-release fertilizer, and this plant has used up all the other time-release fertilizers I put in when I planted it. So it's a good idea to get it going. Again, lots of beneficial bacteria in the worm castings. It's basically worm poop. It'll really help my plant be healthy. Now it's time for the water-soluble fertilizer, which the plant can immediately uptake. This time my watering can has just the Vermistera Vitality or Worm Tea in it. I'm gonna water in all the time-release fertilizers, and the water-soluble fertilizer the plant can immediately uptake. And you can even water the leaves of the plant. It's called a foliar feeding. And the plant will absorb all the nutrients through its leaves. Well, I like to do this in the morning so the plant has time to dry throughout the day, that way causing less disease to your plant. And you really see a difference in your fruit production when you're consistent with your fertilizing schedule. With my raised beds, I stick to this schedule about once a month with my containers. I do the water soluble every 2 weeks and the time released about once a month. My raised bed gardening book has my full season-long fertilizing schedule. Next mistake is skipping shade cloth in the intense heat. When the temperatures get above 90 degrees, these little flowers here on the tomato plant start drying up and dropping off. And the flowers are what produce the fruit. So no flowers, no fruit. Now this is a really easy fix. Just drape some shade cloth over your tomato plant. This is about a 40% block. And that way it still allows some of the sunlight to get through, but blocks out all the intensities of the sun's rays. Now we've actually done some tests under the shade cloth, putting our thermometer under here, and it actually stays about 10 degrees cooler, which can make a huge difference in the heat of the summer. So over 90 degrees, throw some shade cloth over your tomato plants. When it gets under 90 degrees, simply uncover and let your tomatoes enjoy the sun. Now, if your temperatures are very, very intense, you may want to try a higher shade block percentage. This one is a 60% shade cloth. There's areas where you have heat all summer long. You may even want to leave this up over your tomato plants during the whole entire summer, or construct some type of a permanent shade cloth structure for your plants. Thanks for watching. See you next time in the garden.